Hey everybody. Yeah, it's about 4:45 in the morning, and I have to be at work in about 5 hours 14 minutes, or 4 hours 14 minutes to be exact. Um, but I thought I'd take this time because one, of course, I'm going to drink some Red Bull, some energy drinks, caffeine, whatever to keep me going. But anyway, I thought I'd take this time to talk about something that I talked about last year, and people still kind of discuss it even to this day. You know, in a few weeks, it's going to be a year. It's hard to believe, but in a few weeks, it's going to be about a year since Saturday morning cartoons officially ended. Yeah, this month, if you want to look at it as a whole, will mark 1 year since Saturday morning cartoons officially ended. Now, I know some people might come out and say, well, Saturday morning cartoons are not totally dead, Brian. They're still going. That's true. They are still going. They are still going. There's no doubt about it. They are still going. But they're going in a way that not many people like myself growing up with Saturday morning cartoons would consider traditional. You see, true, you have your Nicktoons and your Nickelodeons and heck, even your Hub Network or your Discovery Family that is doing cartoons and everything. But let's face facts. The cartoons that they show on Saturday mornings are the same kind of cartoons that you see every day. And you can go on demand and watch them. So it's not much of a traditional feel. Now, for those of us that grew up on Saturday mornings, and with the where did I put it at? Let me see. Where did I put it at? It's up here somewhere. I know I put it in here somewhere. But with the advert of inventing, here we go, of DVDs like this, with the advert and of DVDs like this is the 70s. I've got this is volume 1 of the kid favorite Saturday morning cartoon 70s. I got the volume 1 80s edition in the rec room. But with the advert of DVD sets like that, and then you got things like, Netflix and Hulu. I mean, Hulu even has a Saturday mornings channel dedicated to cartoons they considered were Saturday mornings, even though some of them might be questionable because of the fact that, well, technically, from someone like my standpoint, they weren't really Saturday mornings. I mean, He-Man, She-Ra, you can consider them Saturday mornings in some markets, but most times they were kind of like weekday shows. I'm just saying. But the point is, when I look back at the fact that it's been 1 year since traditional Saturday morning cartoons went off the air, it's hard to think that, it's been a year since that's happened, since a tradition that I grew up on and that my parents grew up on and my sisters grew up on, died out. I mean, it's like I said in the video I think I did last year about it, an audio video or whatever it was. I can remember specifically getting up every Saturday morning with my sisters and watching Saturday morning cartoons. I remember getting up specifically with them, and one of the first shows we would watch, either we got up at 7 or 8, depending on when we would get up on Saturday mornings, because we would like any kids back in the 80s and even the early 90s, and for my oldest sister about the about the late 70s, about the late 70s, we would get up and we would watch as earliest as we can every Saturday morning cartoon that was on, or those that we considered were favorites. I can remember several times if we got up at 7:30 or 7 o'clock or whatever, we would try to watch the Smurfs because I think the Smurfs were like one of the first shows on at the time. I remember at times when Muppet Babies came out, we would try to watch Muppet Babies, and that was my stomach. I apologize. We would try to watch Muppet Babies. We would try to watch, when Beetlejuice became a series, back in the late '80s, early '90s, we would watch that. You know, we would watch anything that came out at that time that we thought was good. Smurfs, Beetlejuice. I remember, like I say, Muppet Babies was on there. I know we watched a lot of the Looney Tunes when they were on the various channels that they came on before settling on ABC. I remember a lot of these things. I remember watching Ewoks as a kid. Heck, I have the Ewoks series completely downloaded and ready to be transferred onto DVD, which I have to do real soon. And might do that this upcoming week. But I have the Ewoks. I have a whole block of cartoons someone put on a torrent of nothing but pilots of shows that not only aired on the weekdays but aired on Saturday mornings. So I have a lot of this kind of stuff. But again, I remember watching Ewoks. I'm watching Ewoks with my sisters, watching the droids. It was a great time to be a kid back then. And to know that this was a tradition that kept going on and on and on until at least last year. In a sense, even being at the age of 35 years old last year, put a smile on my face, and anybody that was around my age range or older, it sort of put a smile on our face because we knew Saturday mornings was still around. Now, a lot of people look at the decline of Saturday mornings due to a lot of things. And the decline of Saturday mornings is not just because of the invention of things like this or the iPad or the smartphone or the Android or anything. It wasn't any of that. What it was specifically, folks, wasn't just things like Netflix. Wasn't things like Hulu. Wasn't any of that. What it was a decline that slowly started to begin actually when Saturday mornings were beginning themselves. When Saturday mornings was getting a foothold and building that foundation into what would be a huge phenomenon for kids for the next, I'd say, 30, 40 years, 30, 40, 50 years. It began then. For about almost 30, 40 to almost 50 years, that foundation was growing and growing and growing. But even back in the late 60s, according to Wikipedia, there were a lot of groups, there was several groups, one in particular, that got on the case of the fact that Saturday morning cartoons were promoting violence. They were not healthy. They were doing this and that. And a lot of people think that happened back in the 80s and early 90s. Yes, most of it did really start to take off then, but it was actually back in the late 60s when it happened. As a matter of fact, if I can pull it up here, it again happened back in the late 60s. And it was with a group, if I can find them.
There's something for every sports fan on CBSLocalSports.com.
Sorry about that.
Watch live radio shows and original video programming while reading national articles from some of the best writers in the country. Visit
Sorry about that. I have a podcast on there. That was my fault. I apologize. So anyway, like I said, back in the late 60s, there was a group that tried to really bring the downfall of Saturday morning cartoons, even as they were rising up and becoming the phenomenon they were. As a matter of fact, if I can find it, should be here in the history section. This is on Wikipedia if you guys want to know. Watch group backlash. This is one of them. It says here, this is in the watch group, this is in the history section. It says, parent, and I quote, parents' lobby groups like Action for Children's Television appeared in the late 60s, and this was the reason. They said they voiced concerns about the presentation of commercialism, violence, antisocial attitudes, and stereotypes in Saturday morning cartoons. By the 1970s, these groups exercised enough influence that the television networks felt compelled to lay down more stringent content rules for the animation houses. By 1976, the Federal Trade Commission (FTC) was openly considering a ban on all advertising during television programming targeting preschoolers and severe restrictions on other children's programming advertising, which would have effectively killed off the format. The commission ultimately dropped the proposal. So you see, even back in the 1960s, like I said, when Saturday morning cartoons was building that foundation and becoming the phenomenon it was, that I grew up on, along with my sisters and my relatives, even back in the late 60s, they were trying to bring down Saturday morning cartoons. And why? Who knows? God only knows, but I know that here it kind of gives you an idea that it might have been some of these people that back then, and even there are some today, that feel television is not cracked up to be what it is. And that Saturday morning cartoons, that cartoons period, are not a good influence. But again, it shows you that the decline on Saturday mornings was started even back in the late 1960s and throughout the 70s. But thankfully, in the 70s, that decline that they were trying to start was ceased, and instead of starting to crumble, it's just started to rebuild any kind of damage it was given. Now it says that they said the compromise of this were things like Schoolhouse Rock, which is a good show, which was a good program, was aired on ABC, and it said that ABC also had some other educational things like Time for Timer and the Bod Squad that all had long runs. And CBS also had things like news segments for children in the news, which was a children's news segment. And NBC had things like Ask NBC News and One to Grow On. So, in a sense, even though they tried to shut Saturday morning cartoons down throughout that time, at least the networks and the FCC or the FTC at the time, whatever, complied and said, okay, look, we'll have them do something educational, so at least your worries will be easy for me to say, thwarted, or anything like that, or thwarted, but at least they'll be, sobered. They'll be kind of like, your worries will be sobered. In other words, you won't have to worry that much anymore because they will get education. Now, again, that kind of shows you that the decline was there, but slowly it ceased to, it was kind of a block, was sort of a temporal block that, sort of like the Berlin Wall, if you will, I hate to use that as an example, was put up, for a while, that kind of was like a compromise. Like, okay, you got what you wanted, but you stay on that side. Let the kids have their Saturday morning cartoons. Let the networks have their Saturday morning cartoons programming blocks. Let them have it. And thankfully they did. But it wouldn't be the end. You see, even throughout the 80s, a lot of groups tried to get Saturday mornings to be more educational. And there's a lot of people, and a lot of kids at that time, including myself, that were like, why should we get more education on Saturday mornings when we get that education Monday through Fridays, at our school? Why do we need more education? Why do we need this? That was always a young kid's attitude, even to this day. So, anyway, again, it's kind of hard to it's kind of sad to look back on the fact that it's going to be a year since Saturday morning cartoons officially ended. And again, a lot of people can put the blame on a lot of the evolution of technology with things like the iPod or the iPad or the Kindles or the Androids or whatever, or Netflix or Hula and all that. You could put the blame on that the more you want, and that's okay. But still, in the end, you have to realize they don't take the blame all the time. They're not the ones really to blame. The blame sometimes falls elsewhere. Like according to the Wikipedia site here, one of the things that helped on the decline, even as early as the '80s, but it was a very slow decline. Like okay, like I mentioned, using the Berlin Wall or a border wall or whatever as an example. The very slow decline is kind of like people climbing over that wall or sneaking under that wall to try to get to the other side and get to that freedom, get to those opportunities. And that slow decline was starting to slowly climb over that wall. And part of that was, and that first slow climb was first run syndication. According to Wikipedia, for the rise of first run syndication, animated programs, which usually had a greater artistic freedom and looser standards than those that were mandated by a network. These programs include G.I. Joe, Thundercats, Transformers, He-Man, She-Ra, DuckTales, Spider-Man, and His Amazing Friends, which, believe it or not, was an NBC show, but also went into syndication. First 2 seasons of Tiny Toons, the first 3 seasons of TMNT, original TMNT. Were basically part of that reason. And then the second reason, which was a slow climb, but a more faster climb, even getting past the first run syndication climb over the wall, all over that wall, was cable television. Now cable television, especially with Nickelodeon, Disney Channel and all that, they had their own programming that was exclusive to their channel, so they really didn't affect that much. They really didn't affect that much until later on you got into the 90s. You got things like Cartoon Network, then you got Toon Disney, then you got Boomerang, and then of course, and then you started Nickelodeon, you started to expand into Nicktoons and all that, and it's like, the eventuality of the decline growing even faster, and that wall starting to slowly be climbed over, and because of those various climbers getting over and crossing that border, that wall started to wear and tear and start to crumble piece by piece, is sort of like what the decline was. And then, of course, you had, the FCC with the introduction of the IE mandate in 1990, which required all broadcast networks to air educational and informational children's programming for at least 3 hours a week. Concurrent with this, the FTC outlawed the advertising of both premium rate telephone numbers and tie-in merchandise during children's hours. Both of these factors limited creative options and cut off large avenue sources for children's programming on network television and would overrun Saturday morning cartoons. In other words, remember when we would get advertisements for guys like him? Well, not this, but basically the regular Transformers of Optimus Prime, things like the Ninja Turtles, stuff like that. Remember we'd see that kind of stuff? And also remember we'd always see those 1-800 numbers. Sometimes they would use characters like He-Man or She-Ra to advertise them, or they'd do their own local advertising. And, to me,